My name is Diane. I am 34 years old, and I have sat across from my mother at many dinner tables in my life. But the one I remember most clearly is the Tuesday evening in March when she looked me in the eye, in front of my husband and 3 relatives, and said the words she had been building toward for years. You will never succeed at anything meaningful. You simply don't have what it takes. Nobody spoke. My aunt looked at her plate. My cousin shifted in his chair. My husband, Paul, picked up his glass and took a slow sip, which was somehow worse than if he had laughed. My mother, Veronica, sat at the head of the table the way she always did, straight-backed, composed, wearing the particular expression of someone who believes they are being helpful by being brutal. She had spent 30 years perfecting that expression. It looked like concern. Felt like a knee on your throat. I felt heat rise up the back of my neck. My hands were very still in my lap. Then I smiled. Not a wide smile. Just a small, quiet one. The kind that comes when you have already made a decision but haven't told anyone yet. You're right, I said softly. For now. Nobody caught it. Not Paul. Not my aunt. Not even Veronica. But I heard it. And I meant every word. That night I lay awake long after Paul fell asleep beside me, staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the times I had dismissed what I was now seeing clearly. The time Veronica told my high school teacher I struggled with numbers, just before I was supposed to be recommended for an advanced class. The teacher believed her. I never got the recommendation. The time she mentioned to my first employer casually that I had always been a bit scattered, right before my probation review. I didn't get the permanent position. The time she convinced Paul, early in our marriage, that my ideas for starting a small consulting practice were too risky for someone like her. He agreed with her. I dropped the idea. I had told myself each of these things was a coincidence, that she meant well, that I was being unfair to her. But lying there in the dark that Tuesday night, I stopped lying to myself. I got up quietly, went to the kitchen table and opened a notebook. At the top of the first page I wrote one sentence. What has she actually done, and when? I began writing. The list was longer than I expected. What I didn't know yet was that Veronica had done something like this before. Not to me. To someone else in our family. And that story, when I finally heard it, would change everything. 2 weeks after the dinner, I registered a small online consulting service. I used a variation of my middle name, Adele Creative, so nothing connected it to me directly. Told no one. Not Paul. Not my closest friend. Nobody. I spent 3 evenings building a simple website and wrote 4 blog posts about professional organization and small business strategy. Things I genuinely understood well from years of corporate work I had quietly excelled at while Veronica told everyone around me I was barely keeping up. The first person who found the site left a comment saying one of the articles had helped her restructure her team. I sat with that for a long time. Then I prepared a small pitch for a local women's business group. A 10-minute presentation about brand positioning for new entrepreneurs. Nothing grand. Just a first step. I didn't tell Veronica, but somehow she found out. I still don't know exactly how. A relative who saw something, a careless word from Paul, a combination of both. But 3 days before my presentation, I started receiving polite messages from organizers saying they had heard concerns about my professional background. The pitch was cancelled. I sat in my car outside the community center and thought for a long time. Then I thought, what if this isn't a failure? What if this is information? I drove home and started planning properly. The plan required something I hadn't tried before. I had to become invisible in a very specific way. Not absent, present but uninteresting. I had to let Veronica believe she was winning. I started the performance carefully. At family gatherings, I mentioned that the consulting idea hadn't worked out. I looked tired when I arrived places. I talked about how difficult things were with a vague, defeated tone that I practiced in the mirror before I was satisfied with how natural it sounded. I let Paul see me close my laptop when he walked in rather than explain what I was working on. I didn't lie about anything specific. I just let people see what they expected to see. Veronica responded exactly as I had predicted. She became warmer, more attentive. She called more often, offered advice I hadn't asked for, and once brought me a book called Finding Peace and Simplicity with a handwritten note inside that said, "Sometimes our ambitions exceed our abilities, and that's okay." Kept the book. Kept the note. I photographed both. What Veronica didn't know was that while she was enjoying her sense of restored order, I was working every night between 10 and 1 in the morning on something she had no knowledge of. And that the mentor I had quietly reached out to 3 weeks earlier had just replied to my email. Her name was Mrs. Abera. She had been my supervisor for 2 years at a consultancy firm where I worked before I married Paul, and she was the only manager I had ever had who looked at my work and said, without hesitation, "You're better than this role." I had lost touch with her when I moved cities. I found her through a professional network, sent a careful message, and waited 4 days before she replied. We met at a coffee shop on the other side of town. Not our neighborhood, not anywhere Veronica or her circle of friends might appear. Mrs. Abera was exactly as I remembered. Precise, direct, and completely unbothered by pleasantries. She read my brief summary of Adele Creative and asked 5 sharp questions. Then she put down her cup and said, "This is actually good. What's stopping you?" I told her. Not everything, but enough. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I can make 2 introductions. The rest is yours to build." What she didn't say, and what I only realized later, was that one of those introductions would eventually be worth more than anything else she could have offered me. But that was still months away. What I worried about that evening driving home was simpler and more immediate. If Veronica found out about Mrs. Abera, would the one ally I had trusted with the truth disappear before I had built anything worth protecting? I started noticing the conversations between Paul and my mother more carefully. They had always spoken regularly. More regularly than I had realized, actually. Short calls. Brief messages. The kind of contact that doesn't look significant until you pay attention to the pattern. One afternoon I came home earlier than expected from a meeting. Paul was on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was low, the way it gets when he doesn't want to be overheard. Not because he's whispering, but because he's careful with volume. I stood in the hallway and listened. "She's been more down lately," he was saying. "The consulting thing didn't go anywhere. I honestly don't think she has the confidence for it." Silence while the other person spoke. "I know. Think you're right. Maybe it's better this way." He didn't know I was there. He ended the call, went to the fridge, and I walked quietly back to the front door, opened it again normally and called out, "I'm home." He said, "Hey," and asked about my day. That evening, I sat with what I had heard and turned it over carefully. Paul wasn't cruel. I want to be honest about that. He was something more complicated. He was a man who had decided somewhere along the way that Veronica's version of me was accurate. And he had stopped looking for evidence to the contrary. What I decided that night was to give him some. Very slowly. Without him realizing what I was doing. The information came from my cousin Blessing. She called me on a Sunday afternoon. And she wasn't her usual easy self. She sounded careful, like she was choosing words before she used them. She asked how I was. Said fine. Then she was quiet for a moment and said, "Can I tell you something that happened years ago? Something involving Auntie Veronica." I sat down. Blessing told me about our cousin Kechi, who had started a small import business about 15 years earlier, before I was old enough to pay attention to adult matters. The business had been doing well. She had a supplier, 2 employees, and a growing customer base. Then Veronica got involved. She offered to help manage communications. She was family. She was trusted. Over 3 months, she quietly told Nkechi's main supplier that Nkechi was financially unreliable. She told 2 of her key customers that the quality of the products was declining. She did it gently, helpfully, with concern in her voice. The business collapsed within 6 months. Kechi moved away. Nobody connected it to Veronica until years later. "Why are you telling me this now?" asked Blessing. "Because," she said carefully, "I've been watching how she talks about you. And it looks the same." Thanked her. After the call, I sat quietly for a long time. History, it turned out, was trying to warn me. The invitation arrived in late April. Veronica's neighbor, a woman named Stella, hosted a quarterly social gathering for women in the area. The kind of event where people dressed nicely, ate small food, and talked about their lives in ways that felt supportive on the surface but were quietly competitive underneath. Veronica brought me as her guest. In the car, she said she thought it would be good for me to be around positive energy. I thanked her and looked out the window. At the gathering, she introduced me to several people. Each introduction carried a small weight I had learned to notice. This is my daughter Diane. She's been going through a bit of a difficult stretch. Diane has been trying to find her footing professionally. You know how it is. Some people take longer to figure things out. Each time I smiled pleasantly and said something agreeable. What nobody in that room knew was that my phone was in my jacket pocket, and I had pressed record before we walked through the door. Not for anything dramatic. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I simply wanted to hear it back later, clearly, without the softening effect of my own hope that I was misreading her. Later that night I listened to 40 minutes of audio. I wasn't misreading her. I saved the file to 3 different places and went to sleep steadily, more clearly than I had in months. The first real signal came in May. A small business magazine with a strong online presence ran a weekly feature called Quiet Builders, short profiles of people doing interesting work below the radar. I had submitted a brief description of Adele Creative 3 months earlier, not expecting anything, mostly to practice presenting the work clearly. They published it on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, the article had been shared 400 times. My inbox had 11 new messages. 3 of them were from potential clients. One was from a woman who said she had been trying to explain a similar service concept to investors for months, and that my framing had helped her finally articulate it. I read every message twice. I didn't tell Paul. I didn't tell Blessing. I didn't even tell Mrs. Abra until a week later. I just sat with it. Let it settle into the part of me that Veronica had spent years trying to hollow out. The question I sat with over several evenings was whether to let this moment stay invisible inside the performance I was maintaining at home. The failing persona was still working. Veronica was still comfortable. Paul was still unaware. Revealing the article meant risking everything I was building. Not revealing it meant I could keep building. Chose silence. For now. But I felt something shift. A small solid thing. Foundation. In June, Veronica called to tell me about a workshop. It's for women who are feeling a bit lost professionally, she said. I think it could really help you. The facilitator is excellent. I've already paid for your ticket. The language was so perfectly crafted that I almost admired it. A bit lost professionally. She had already paid. The kindness as a cage. I accepted immediately and thanked her warmly. What Veronica didn't know was that I had already looked up the workshop when I saw it advertised 2 weeks earlier. I had looked up the attendee list, which was publicly visible on the event page. And I had noticed that 3 of the confirmed attendees were people Mrs. Abra had mentioned as potentially valuable contacts. One of them was a woman named Priya, who ran a growing consulting platform and had been looking, according to Mrs. Abra, for strategic partners. I arrived at the workshop early. I found a seat near the front, close to where Priya eventually sat. During the first coffee break, I introduced myself using the Adele Creative name. We talked for 12 minutes. She asked for my card. Gave her one. Veronica arrived 20 minutes late and spent most of the workshop near the back, chatting with the facilitator. She didn't see me with Priya. She couldn't have imagined, driving home together afterward, that the event she had arranged to diminish me had instead just introduced me to the person who would change the direction of everything. Paul started noticing things he couldn't quite name. I could see it in the small pauses before he answered questions. The way he sometimes looked at me when I was working at the table, trying to read what I was doing without asking directly. The slight hesitation before agreeing with things Veronica said when we were all together. He wasn't suspicious yet. He was just sensing a gap between the version of me he had accepted and the version of me that was actually present. I didn't confront him with it. Instead, I made small adjustments. I left a printed email on the kitchen table, from a satisfied client, brief and professional, and let him find it. I didn't mention it. When he brought it up that evening, asking what the project was, I said simply, "Some consulting work. It's going well." Then I changed the subject. The next week I mentioned casually that I had a call scheduled with a potential partner. I didn't say who. I just let the information exist without drama. Paul's responses were careful. He wasn't ready to fully revise his picture of me, but I could see the edges of it beginning to loosen. What I didn't know then was whether, when the moment came, he would choose clearly. Whether the years of Veronica's framing had sunk deep enough to keep him there. I didn't know if I would want him to choose me. But I watched and I waited and I continued. The leak happened in July and it nearly stopped everything. Paul came across the Adele Creative website. I don't know exactly how. He may have seen the name on a browser history, or noticed something in a document I hadn't closed properly. However it happened, he came to me one evening with his phone in his hand and the website on the screen. "Is this yours?" he asked. I looked at the screen. I looked at him. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "How long?" "About 8 months. Another pause. "Why didn't you tell me?" I chose my words very carefully. Because I needed to know it was real before I shared it. I needed to build something that was actually working before I talked about it. He looked at the website for another moment. The design was clean. Testimonials were real. The numbers I had quietly added to the About section were accurate. 43 clients served, an average satisfaction rating of 4.8 out of 5. He handed the phone back and said, "Okay." Just that. "Bae." What I couldn't tell him then was that I had already made the decision to use this moment. Because I knew, with reasonable certainty, that he would mention the website to Veronica. And when he did, I needed her to hear a version of it that kept her from taking it seriously. So the next morning I left a printed page on the desk showing a client complaint, a fake one I had written the night before. Just visible enough for Paul to notice. My aunt's name was Caro. She was Veronica's younger sister, and for most of my life she had stayed quietly in her sister's shadow, agreeing with her in rooms full of people and sometimes privately rolling her eyes about it later when it was just the two of us. She called me in August. "I heard something at Veronica's house last week," she said. "Something about a business you're running." I asked her what she heard. "She told your uncle that you'd started some small thing online but that it was already falling apart. That you had complaints from clients. That it confirmed what she always said about you." I thanked her for telling me. "Diane," she said, and her voice was careful. "Is it actually falling apart?" "No," I said. I didn't think so." Another pause. "What can I do?" I thought about that for a moment. Then I told her. Not everything. Not the full scope, not Priya, not Mrs. Abra. Not the plan that was now moving faster than even I had expected. But enough that she understood her role if she was willing. She was willing. What I didn't know then was how soon I would need her. Or that the test of her loyalty would come not gradually but suddenly, at a moment I hadn't fully prepared for. September brought the hardest week. Priya and I had been in regular contact since the workshop. The partnership we were discussing would bring Adele Creative into her platform as a featured strategic partner, visible, credible, and positioned in front of her existing client base of over 2,000 businesses. It was the kind of opportunity that changes the shape of what you're building. 3 days before we were due to sign a preliminary agreement, Priya sent a message asking if we could push the meeting back. She had received some information about my professional history that she wanted to clarify. I asked her to tell me what she had heard. She was diplomatic but direct. Someone had contacted her platform through a general inquiry form, describing themselves as a former colleague, expressing concern about my reliability and professional conduct. The message had been vague but specific enough to plant doubt. I knew immediately where it had come from. I just couldn't prove it yet. I asked Priya for 48 hours. She agreed. In those 48 hours I called Mrs. Abra, I called Caro, and I spent one very long night building a document. A clear, factual record of my actual client history, testimonials, completed work and references. Priya read it. She called me the following afternoon. "I'm satisfied," she said. Let's proceed. I said thank you and put the phone down. Then I picked up my notebook and added one more line to the list I had started in March. The investor came through Mrs. Abra's second introduction. His name was Mr. Osei, and he ran a small private fund that supported women-led consulting businesses in their early scaling phase. He was quiet, thorough, and completely uninterested in anything except results. Our first meeting lasted 40 minutes. He asked 12 questions. I answered all of them directly. 2 weeks later he sent a formal letter of investment intent. The amount was not enormous, but it was enough to hire one part-time assistant, upgrade the platform infrastructure, and give Adele Creative the kind of visible structure that says to the world, this is a real business. I signed the letter at my kitchen table on a Wednesday evening while Paul was watching television in the other room. He didn't know what I was signing. He thought I was paying bills. I took a photograph of my signature on that letter and saved it to a folder I had been building for months. A folder that contained, among other things, the audio recordings from Stella's gathering, the photographs of Veronica's book and note, the timeline of sabotaged opportunities one had documented since March, and the fake complaint letter I had planted for Paul. I didn't know exactly when I would use the folder, but I knew the moment was getting close, because Veronica had started talking more. And people who believe they have already won tend to get careless. The gathering was at Veronica's friend Miriam's house in October, a birthday celebration with about 30 guests, mostly women from her social circle, neighbors, and 2 relatives I recognized. I was not invited. I found out about it through Caro, who was invited and attended. She called me the evening after and described it carefully, in the precise way I had asked her to pay attention. At some point in the evening, Veronica had been talking with a group of 4 women about family. The conversation had turned, as it often did with Veronica, to her children. Specifically to me. I've been carrying her for years, Veronica said, according to Caro. Every time she tries something it falls apart. You know, I even tried to get her into a workshop earlier this year to help her find direction. She sat through it and still came home with nothing. Some people simply aren't built for achievement. 3 of the 4 women nodded. The 4th, Caro said, looked slightly uncomfortable. She said it like a fact, Caro told me. Not like she was worried about you. Like she was proud of it. I thanked Caro and asked her one more thing. I asked her to remember who those 4 women were. Because 6 weeks later, every single one of them would be in the same room as me. And they would see something that Veronica had not prepared them for. November arrived, and with it, the first thing I hadn't been able to control. A journalist who covered small business stories in our city had come across the Adele Creative profile through Priya's platform. She reached out directly through my website contact form, asking for a brief interview for a feature she was writing about consulting businesses run by women under 40. I agreed, asked for the piece to run in December, and requested that it not be promoted on social media until I had reviewed it. She agreed to both. What I hadn't anticipated was that a preview of the feature, just 3 lines mentioning my name and business, appeared in the publication's weekly newsletter in mid-November. Paul saw it first. He showed it to me at breakfast with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in a long time. Something between surprise and recalibration. This is a real article, he said. Yes, I said. In an actual publication. Yes, Paul. He put the newsletter down slowly. I watched him think. What I knew, and he was only beginning to understand, was that this was not new. This was the result of 9 months of work he hadn't seen because I had carefully made sure he wouldn't. 9 months of early mornings and late nights and calls from rooms he wasn't in. What I did not yet know was that Veronica had also received the newsletter, and that she had called 2 of her contacts that same morning. Paul came to me the week before the December event. He had been thinking about things for several weeks by then. I could see it in the way he moved around the house, the way conversations ended differently than they used to. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table one evening and said he wanted to talk. Waited. I've been speaking to your mother a lot, he said. More than I probably should have been. I think I let her picture of you replace my own. I said nothing. I don't know exactly what you've built, he continued. But I know it's real. And I think I've been in the wrong place about it. I looked at him for a long time. I wasn't ready to forgive everything. I wasn't sure I trusted the timing. Part of me wondered whether he was shifting because he genuinely saw things clearly now, or because the newsletter and Priya's platform had made the direction of things visible enough that choosing my side was now the safer option. But I also knew that complicated things rarely untangle completely, and that what happened next would tell me more about him than anything he could say sitting at that table. "Come to the event on the 14th, I said. He asked what event. I told him to come and see. What he didn't know was that between that conversation and the 14th, he would do one small thing that helped me without realizing it at all. October through November, I had been making a series of moves that, taken individually, looked like coincidences. I had recommended a supplier to one of Veronica's business-owning friends, the one who had looked uncomfortable at Miriam's gathering. The supplier was excellent. The recommendation was genuine. The friend was grateful and told people about it. I had quietly corrected a piece of misinformation that was circulating in a community business group, something that had been stated as fact, gently, without drama. The correction was accurate and people noticed. I had responded to 2 public comments on the Adele Creative platform in ways that were specific, helpful, and clearly showed deep knowledge of the subject. Both responses were shared by other members. None of these things pointed back to Veronica directly. None of them were confrontational. But they were building a picture. A picture of someone reliable, knowledgeable, and present. The exact opposite of the picture Veronica had been distributing for years. The interesting part was that Veronica herself couldn't see what was happening. She was still watching for weakness. She was looking in the direction she expected the story to go. She wasn't looking at the room I was actually building. And that room, by the first week of December, was nearly ready. In late November, Veronica made her most direct move. She contacted Priya's platform through an official channel, this time using her real name, describing herself as a concerned family member with knowledge of the business owner's history of instability. She referenced the fake complaint letter that Paul had seen months earlier, which meant Paul had told her about it, which confirmed what I had suspected about their conversations. Priya forwarded it to me within the hour with a single message. "Is this the same person as before?" I replied, "Yes. I have documentation. Can we speak tomorrow?" We spoke for 30 minutes. I sent her the folder, not everything but the key items. Timeline. The recording from Stella's gathering. The documented history of the sabotaged opportunities going back to before I started Adele Creative. Priya was quiet for a moment after I finished explaining. "This is a pattern," she said. "Yes," I said. "And you've been building through all of it." "Yes." Another pause. "Diane, I want you to speak at our December showcase. Full presentation slot. I want people to hear this story." I said I would think about it. I already knew the answer. I just needed one more piece to fall into place before I said yes. The piece came from someone I hadn't expected. Her name was Funk. She had been a competitor of sorts. We operated in similar spaces, had overlapping contacts, and had circled each other at events for most of the year without ever speaking directly. She had a larger platform than mine and had been approached by Veronica's contact network at some point, I later discovered, with the same quiet suggestions about my unreliability. She had not acted on them. She reached out to me in early December through a mutual contact, asked for a brief call, and came directly to the point. "I was told some things about you earlier this year," she said. "I didn't act on them because the person who told me had also said similar things about 2 other people I know, and neither of those things turned out to be true." Thanked her. "I'd like to co-present with you at the December showcase," she said. "If you're open to it. I think our work is complementary. And I think standing together publicly sends a message that's worth sending." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said yes. What Veronica didn't know, making her phone calls and sending her careful messages, was that the network she had been trying to poison was becoming, quietly and without drama, the network that was going to stand behind me on the 14th. The week before the showcase, I finalized everything. Mrs. Abra would be in the front row. Cara would bring 2 of the women from Miriam's gathering, the ones who had heard Veronica's speech about carrying me, because Caro had been gently building a friendship with them since October, and they had both confirmed they were curious about Priya's platform event. Funk and I rehearsed our co-presentation twice. It was clean, confident, and real. No performance. No bitterness. Just the actual work, laid out clearly in front of people who could evaluate it on its own terms. I sent Paul the event address and told him to come at 6 p.m. I did not tell Veronica about the event. I didn't need to. I had learned through Caro that Miriam's friend had mentioned it to her the week before, and that Veronica had asked several questions about it. I had also learned that Veronica was planning to attend. I did not try to stop her. I wanted her there. I wanted her in that room, surrounded by people she had spoken to about me, watching something she had spent years trying to prevent. Paul had one more thing to do before the 14th, and he did it without being asked. He told his mother she should come. He didn't know what he was walking her into. Neither did she. The showcase began at 6:30. The room held about 80 people. Clients, partners, investors, community members, journalists covering the small business beat. Priya opened with a 10-minute overview of the platform's growth over the year. Then she introduced the evening's main presentations. Funk went first. She was precise and impressive, and the room was warm by the time she finished. Then Priya said my name. I walked to the front of the room and I looked out at the audience. I found Mrs. Abra immediately. She was smiling the way she had smiled at our very first meeting when she said, "You're better than this role." I found Caro, who gave me a small nod. I found Paul, standing near the back, watching carefully. And I found Veronica. She was seated near the middle, between two women I recognized from Miriam's gathering. Her expression was composed, but I could see the moment she understood the scale of the room, the caliber of the people in it. The name on the presentation screen behind me. Adele Creative. Founded 12 months ago. 47 active clients. Partnership with Priya's platform. Investment support from Mr. Osei's fund. Feature article running in the city's leading small business publication that Friday. I began to speak. I didn't look at Veronica. I didn't need to. I spoke for 22 minutes. I told the story of building Adele Creative from a kitchen table, through early rejections, through a landscape that wasn't always welcoming, with limited resources and no public support structure. I spoke about what it costs to keep building when the people closest to you have decided your ceiling for you. I didn't name anyone. I didn't point to anyone. But everyone who needed to understand understood. When I finished, Priya stood and spoke briefly about the partnership. Then Mr. Osei said 3 sentences from his chair, short, formal, and final, confirming the investment and his confidence in the direction of the business. The room applauded. Afterward, people came to speak with me. The journalist, 2 potential clients, one of the women from Miriam's gathering, who shook my hand and said quietly, "I had no idea." I said, "Most people didn't." Across the room, I could see Veronica. She was standing slightly apart from the people around her, holding her drink, watching. Paul was nearby. He had moved through the room and was now standing closer to her than to me. I watched him say something to her. Her expression didn't change. Then he turned and walked toward me. He didn't say anything elaborate. He said, "I was wrong about some things. I'm sorry." He nodded. It wasn't enough to fix everything. But it was honest, and I was willing to take honesty as a beginning. 3 months have passed since the 14th. Adele Creative has 31 new clients from the showcase and the article. Funk and I have launched a joint workshop series that is already fully booked for the next 2 months. Mrs. Abra joined the business as an advisory board member, which is a title she accepted with the same directness she brings to everything. Mr. Osei has confirmed a second phase of investment. Paul and I are in counseling. It is slow and not always comfortable, but it is real. I don't know yet where it leads. I am not performing optimism about it. Veronica called me once, 2 weeks after the showcase. The call was brief. She said she was proud of what I had built. The sentence was delivered in the same tone she uses for most things. Composed, generous sounding, and entirely unaccompanied by any acknowledgement of what she had done. I thanked her for calling. I did not tell her about the folder. I did not tell her about the recordings, the timeline, or the documentation I have kept carefully and stored in 3 locations. I may never use it, or I may need it someday. What matters is that I have it. What matters more is what I learned this year. That building in silence is not the same as hiding. That patience, when it is purposeful, is one of the most powerful tools available to you. That the people who declare your ceiling the loudest are usually the ones most afraid of your height. She said I would never succeed. I let her be right. For now was always the operative phrase. And now, looking at what I have built, I think she finally understands that.